We're sort of getting crazier, aren't we, as we continue to go on? How many people love to travel, take pictures in real exotic locations? So I asked this next young lady, what is your home address? And the answer is everywhere, because she's never home, because she's always on the road. And she's about to come up and talk to you about life on the road and a project she's working on from Alaska to Mexico. Let me introduce Mandy Lea to the Nikon Theater stage.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Wow. So I am Mandy Lea. I like to call myself a professional nomadic landscape photographer. Kind of a weird title I came up with myself, but I call myself that because I live in a tiny trailer. This is my full-time home. I have been living on the road for the last 2.5 years, and for the last almost 2 years, this guy's been living with me. So there are actually two of us in this little teardrop, which is essentially the size of a car. Living really tiny means living simply and without a lot of belongings. And the reason I like to talk about this at the beginning is because it actually affects my photography. It changes the perspective on the way I see life. When you are able to prioritize what's important to you in life, which to me is the beauty of this country, it makes you view landscapes different. It makes you view your photography different and your subject and what you're shooting. And you've got to have a purpose in your photography. So through this lifestyle is how I came up with my own little mission statement, which is show people things they wouldn't normally see to inspire them to do things they wouldn't normally do. So basically, I'm an inspiration junkie trying to convince people to get off their bums and go explore. So I think that's a pretty cool job, and I love it. One of the ways I am doing that right now is Kendrick and I are currently on a project going from the northernmost part of Alaska all the way through Mexico. We're literally on this trip right now. This whole New York thing is just like a quick little side trip to see you guys. And we've made it as far as just across the Mexico border. We're going to fly back, and we're going to finish up the rest of Mexico. So I want to take this time to show you some of the images I have captured just in the last few months of our trip, and give you guys some tips on ways to think when you're doing landscape photography on the road, because traveling and photographing can be very difficult. So let's get started. First one, embrace less than ideal conditions. When we travel, one of the biggest challenges is that we often don't have control over our situation. Yes, the weather, the lighting, all that fun stuff, but when we travel, sometimes we have time constraints, sometimes we have restrictions on where we can go, what we can do, what we can see. So we've got to embrace these and figure out how to get around it. So starting up in Alaska, right, we go to Denali National Park. And of course, we got rain the entire time we were there. There's one road that goes through Denali, one main road. And unless you have planned ahead and applied for a photography permit or a road permit, they don't let people drive all the way through the park, which means you have to take a bus, like one of those big, annoying school buses, which is filled with a bunch of people, which is not ideal for photography. You don't get to stop when and where you want, so you are at the whims of this bus. But I had to take it on, right? So what you don't see in this picture is you don't see beneath the bottom of the frame the 50 buses that are all parked in the parking lot down here. But I was still able to make the moodiness of the clouds my subject. I was still able to compose it in a way that I created a beautiful image. Other things to remember is that with technology these days, we can bump our ISO up pretty high and still get pretty great handheld shots. So I had my D850 and the 200 to 500 Nikon lens. I was able to hand hold that thing from a bus with very little light and still get very sharp wildlife images. I also tell people always have a slew of lenses within arm's reach, because you never know if something is going to be up close and you're going to need that wide angle lens, you're going to need that macro lens, you're going to need a telephoto lens for something that's further away. So always be ready, always be prepared with all the gear. If you don't know if you need it, take it anyway. If you don't use it, it doesn't matter. I also like to tell people, if you're on the fence about should I get the kit lens, should I spend a lot more money on another lens, always buy the lens. Go for the fast glass, get that 2.8, 1.4 lens, because you're going to be so much happier with what you're able to capture when you're out on the road, and you just need that extra light. There were these amazingly gorgeous sled dogs in Denali. They still have like a sled dog team up there, right? And they were so beautiful, but they were all chained to their little post with these big collars on. They were super happy, don't get me wrong, but I didn't want the collar and the chain. So even though these dogs were maybe 20 feet away from me, I still threw on my telephoto lens because the best way I could find to capture these was to crop in, isolate the dog, the face, what I wanted. So you might be using a lens that you don't expect to use for that situation. So always have them with you. Also, it would be really lovely if we could take our tripod and our monopod on that big bus ride with all those tourists, but we can't, right? So that doesn't mean you can't find other things to stabilize on. All these wildlife shots I took in one day on one bus ride through Denali, and I just set my lens like it was a school bus window. I opened it up and I braced it on that, and it's not perfectly stable, but it helped a lot, and I was able to handhold all these. So, number one. Number two, challenge yourself. I know these sound super basic, but in every profession, we should all be looking to continually improve, continued education. We never know everything we need to know. So ways I do that are challenging myself. Still up in Alaska, we decided to go on one of those glacier cruises where you get to go out and see these beautiful glaciers. But I wasn't able to bring a lot of gear, and I knew I was going to be on this boat. I wasn't going to be able to change lenses very easily, so I decided to challenge myself by choosing one lens to shoot with. Now, I knew there was going to be a lot of wildlife, so I decided to take the 200 to 500, even though I knew this was going to make it more difficult to shoot the big scene, the big glaciers. So what I had to do instead was think of more creative ways, and it made me look at the glacier differently, knowing I didn't have that wide-angle lens. It made me look at the patterns in the ice. It made me crop out the parts that I thought were really interesting. And still, I was able to get that big shot when the glacier was very far away. For perspective, this is a seagull right here. And that's just how big this giant chunk of ice is. Even with the telephoto lens, I feel like I was still able to capture the enormity of the situation. And of course, like I said, I took that lens because there was, in fact, wildlife. And it allowed me to really zoom in and get those. I even found interest in the birds, right? A boring bird sitting on a piece of ice. With the lines, the way, and the shapes, it was just absolutely unbelievable. And sea lions all over the place. The other way I like to challenge myself is to shoot something I'm not used to shooting. So even though I just showed you a bunch of wildlife pictures, I am not a wildlife photographer. I look at people like Christy, who just spoke, and I'm in awe at what they can do and what they can capture. And I have to say, she inspired me while I was in Alaska to go see the Katmai bears that she did that amazing video of. And this is not my thing. So for me to get there and to see these bears and to try to photograph interaction of animals, which is something I am not used to photographing, challenged me. And now I take some of these thoughts and methods and that experience, and I can bring it into my own landscape photography. It also gave me the opportunity to take an airplane out to Katmai. And I got to shoot aerial landscape photography, which is something I never would have been able to do if I didn't decide to just go for it and just buy that ticket. Number 3, make the most of your time. When we travel, we often are on a schedule. We don't all have the luxury of just hanging out in one place for a week or a month to get the perfect spot to explore. So you've got to look ahead. You've got to research. When we were on our way out of Alaska, there was one spot I had seen a picture of, and I knew I wanted to shoot it. This is called Portage Glacier. We had 1 day to do it, so I figured out the best time to go. We parked in the trailhead, and we actually slept there overnight, and I wanted to shoot it at sunset. So we hiked down to the lake, but the sun wasn't setting yet. There was no color in the sky, so I created a black and white image. And I love it. I love the black and white. I love the way the ice looks in the black and white. And then I thought to myself, I could wait here until sunset. But I remember on the way in, I saw this really cool little pond. And if we start leaving now, we could get up there by sunset. So on the way out, we got to this little pond that was, just above the lake. And we sat there and waited for the sunset. And when it got colorful, I was able to capture a whole different angle of that because I thought ahead, I planned, we had this 1 day to do it. There's also another shot over there on the side wall of this same glacier. Unfortunately, we aren't on vacation all the time, and we had to book it back to the lower 48 for obligations, right? We all have that. So we had to drive straight through Jasper National Park and Banff National Park, which are like amazingly beautiful parks, and it almost killed me. But we had one night, just because it took 2 days to drive through it, where we were going to spend the night. And there was no way I was going to waste one sunrise. So I like to tell people, even if you have a travel day, even if you are driving 10 hours that day, take the time, if you're in a special place, to get up and go photograph sunrise. So we woke up 2 hours earlier than we would have normally had to wake up. We went up and we found this is Moraine Lake. It's a popular place to shoot, and it's popular for a reason. And we experienced one of the most peaceful sunrises we've gotten to see. And then we drove 10 hours. And that's life, but sometimes that's what you have to do. Number 4, practice different techniques. So I often go through little photo phases where I get super obsessed with doing one thing. And it's great because it makes you perfect that one thing. So when I got my D850 and we were in the Grand Tetons, I got super obsessed with panoramics. So the D850 already, it's one single image is this huge, brilliant image with tons of pixels. But when you stitch 8 of them together, you get the most unbelievable, 5 gigabyte image. But it's super sharp. I can zoom in on it. And I got super obsessed with this. So while I was in the Tetons, I focused on panoramics. And don't just try something once or twice. Make yourself do it over and over and over until you perfect it. The other thing I like to do to challenge myself is choose one subject and shoot it in as many different ways as you can. I don't know if you guys ever shoot in groups, with clubs, in workshops, even with friends. But you go to one location, and you all walk away with a different picture, right? And it's so cool because you're like, wow, I didn't see that, I didn't see that. So I like to challenge myself by seeing if I can see a picture that a bunch of different people would take. So in the Tetons, in the spring, they have these yellow flowers, and they're everywhere. So I thought this would be a great subject to try this on. So I would shoot it in the middle of the day. I would shoot it at sunset. I'd put them in my foreground. I'd make them less obvious of a subject. And I'd even get down beneath them and make them my subject and put something else behind it. And that is a really interesting way. It makes you look at that one subject over and over and over and see how many different angles you can see it at. Number 5, go back to your roots. So as I said earlier, we should all try to improve all the time, continued education, all that. But sometimes that improvement happens so slowly that it's hard to see in yourself. And you don't know how much better you're actually getting. I grew up in Colorado, which is where my love for photography began. I wasn't very good, but I loved it, and I went out and I shot all the time. And one thing I used to shoot was the aspen. And so as we're making our way down, we hit Colorado just this September in the fall, when all the leaves are changing. And I start photographing, and I'm getting great stuff. I'm getting images that I'm seeing. I'm getting the colors, I'm getting the moon, I'm getting the sun. And these are images that I always envisioned when I was younger shooting the Aspens, but I could never capture because I just wasn't good enough. After I left Colorado and I came back, I tried to get this shot when I was in high school, like 100 times, because I'd seen it online, right? Everybody does this. And I was like, I want to do that, and I never could. And now I can. So going back to this place that I know, and this place that I used to shoot as a kid, and now I'm able to get what I always hoped I could get, shows that improvement, and you know, lets me know I'm doing something right. So go back to an old project that you started a long time ago and maybe weren't happy with, and redo it. Number 6, define the unique characteristics of an area. So when we shoot portraits, what makes a good portrait? What are we trying to do? We're trying to find something characteristic to that person, an emotion or feeling or something about them. And landscape is no different. When we shoot a landscape, we should always be trying to make our subject something that defines that area. And when we travel, it's especially difficult because we might be going to new places that we don't know. So you might have to stop and actually think, where am I and what's cool here? And can I break the mold of what all the other shots look like there? So by the time we headed down into Texas, I've shot Big Bend National Park over and over and over. And I always get very similar shots. So this time I thought I want to get something more unique, something that maybe doesn't look like Texas but has some element of Texas in it. So I go to this overlook, and rather than shooting the overlook like I've shot 100 times before, I decided this cactus would be my subject. Because it's very Texas, you know where you are, but yet when you look beyond, it kind of breaks that mold. Texas is known for its skies and the color and the rocks. So I focused far more on this trip of trying to capture those characteristics. Still in my panoramic phase, I'm still in this phase, by the way. I've been stitching together just tons of images. And I love this one because if you look at it, people always say, where is this, Mandy? Is this Texas? No, that's not Texas. It is. Texas has little mountains. And so I love this shot because it has the red rocks of Texas. It has the desert plant life, but it doesn't look like Texas at all. It also has these ranges. And I love this one because this could be any range of mountains at all. But if you know Texas, and if you've ever been to Big Bend, you might recognize a unique formation right here. It looks kind of like a Batman symbol, but it's actually called mule's ears. So somebody who knows Texas might look at this and go, oh yeah, that's Big Bend. I like that area. So those images were really unique to me because I feel like I captured it without it really being obvious that where we were. Stepping out of your comfort zone. This one's hard because it's not comfortable. But after Texas, we decided to cross the border into Mexico because that's where we're headed. Now, we haven't officially done the Mexico leg of our journey. That's next. But we did jump down in there for a weekend, kind of test it out and see how it was. So right across the Texas border is a little town called Boquillas. And I went down there to photograph it, and it was something unlike anything else I've ever experienced. I found myself not shooting landscapes, but shooting this village and this town that, quite honestly, is falling apart. They're very remote. They have no, they have solar power and no plumbing. And so I found myself focusing on the buildings and the homes where people are still living and having to actually interact with the people. And it was very new for me and somewhat uncomfortable, but a camera is like a universal language. So I embraced it, and I was chatting with the couple little boys there, and they ran and they grabbed these 2 little Chihuahua puppies and they set them down so I could photograph them, just because I had my camera with me. And I can take all of that experience and I can take that into my landscape photography. The more feeling and emotion you put behind your images, the more impact they're going to have on people. Take photographs, but make memories. I know, super cliche, but this is something I'm actually really passionate about. I know when we're out visiting somewhere, we all look at Instagram and we see people taking selfies and we kind of make fun of them a little bit. But I know deep down inside, you guys are actually kind of like, ah, man, I wish I had a picture like that. So my typical MO when I'm out shooting is to set up my tripod, put my camera on it, and take all my landscape shots. Make sure I get the shots that I need of the landscape. But you have time out there. That's the great thing about landscape photography is it's much slower moving. And so after you get your shot, I'll finish up and I'll make Kendrick get in a picture with me. And it usually takes a little convincing. I've usually got to get him in there, but he eventually does. And when I look back at my pictures, this picture isn't ever getting sold. I'm never making any money on these pictures. But these are the pictures that I care about when I look back. And when you travel and you look back at all your vacation pictures, or when my mom shows me her vacation pictures, I'm like, oh, those are great, Mom, really good. But where's the pictures of you and Dad? And so we all need to remember to do that. And I know this is a super cheesy shot, but I love it and I value it because of what it means to me. So don't forget to do that. You can see more of my work at mandyleaphoto.com. Roamingwithrocky.com is actually our Alaska to Mexico trip page. So that one's going to have all of our videos that we do about our Alaska to Mexico trip. And I just had a book come out, which is like weird because now I can say I'm an author, which is crazy. And that's available on my website too. So thank you all so much for listening to me, and have fun and go adventuring.
Changes my focal length to roughly 750 millimeters without